They were clapping. That was the first sound I heard before everything inside me went quiet. The scrape of chairs, the buzz of cheap lights, and the laughter. God, the laughter at that long pizza table in Tucson where my family decided to give away my life's work like it was a raffle prize. Erin's got that pretty little house in the suburbs, my brother Brad Coleman said, raising his glass like he was pitching a business deal. It's just her, after all. Eli and Nora could really use that yard. Eli and Nora, his 2 kids, 6 and 4, sat beside him, swinging their legs under the table, innocent and clueless. Across from him, his wife Lacey smiled that rehearsed smile she wore like perfume. My parents, Frank and Helen Cole, sat at the head of the table, watching, proud, as if Brad had just announced he'd won an award instead of my mortgage. Then came the applause. Aunts, cousins, even Uncle Dave, who never clapped for anything. The sound hit me like a slap. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe they were teasing me the way families do when they've had too much wine. But no one laughed. They were serious. I looked around at the table, the faces that raised me, scolded me, prayed over me. They were all smiling, nodding, agreeing that yes, Erin should hand over her house because Brad had a family, and I didn't. Inside, something cracked. I forced a laugh, sharp, brittle. You can't be serious. But Helen, my mother, leaned forward, her tone patient, condescending. Sweetheart, family helps family. You have more space than you need. My chest tightened. She always said things like that. You have more than you need. When I was 12, she said it about my birthday money. When I was 24, about my savings account. And now, at 32, about my home. Brad grinned wider, mistaking my silence for compliance. It's just temporary, he said, until we get on our feet. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Temporary. The same word he used 5 years ago when I paid their electric bill. Temporary. When I covered their car repairs. Temporary. When I watched my own bank account shrink while they bought toys, dinners, little luxuries. I stared at him, at the man who'd been the golden child his entire life, the one my parents called the dreamer, while I was the responsible one. The clapping faded, replaced by a silence so heavy it hummed. The smell of pepperoni turned sour in my nose, and before I could stop myself, I laughed again. Not the polite kind this time, but the sharp, startled laugh of someone finally seeing the truth. You want my house? I said quietly. Brad blinked. What? I pushed my chair back. The legs screeched against the tile, slicing through the room. Every eye turned toward me. You'll get your answer, I said. But not the one you expect. No one spoke. Even the kids froze. And in that stunned silence beneath the cheap lights and the half-eaten pizza, I realized something that would change everything. They weren't clapping for me. They were clapping for my obedience. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to give it to them. The night after the dinner, I couldn't sleep. The applause kept echoing in my head, sharp, hollow, endless. I lay in the dark of my small Tucson house, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles, wondering when my family started believing my life was theirs to manage. Maybe it began years ago, back when I was too young to know that giving could turn into owing. I was 9 when my brother Brad broke our father's favorite fishing rod. Mom, Helen, stood in the doorway, frowning. Who did this, she asked. Brad stayed quiet. I opened my mouth to tell the truth, but then he looked at me, eyes wide and pleading. Mom's voice sharpened. Erin and I said it. It was me. Mom sighed, disappointed but relieved, and told me to go to my room. As I walked away, I heard her whisper to Brad, "She's a good sister. You should learn from her." That was the first time I learned how praise could feel like punishment. It only grew from there. By high school, I was the dependable one, the child who could be trusted to clean up the messes. When Dad, Frank, lost his job for a few months, I got a part-time gig at the library, helping with groceries. When Brad dropped out of college for the third time, I was the one who wired him rent money. Mom called it family duty, but duty has a way of becoming habit, and habit when mixed with guilt becomes a kind of leash. Even when I moved out at 25, I couldn't break free. I thought distance would mean independence, but guilt travels faster than mail. Every "Hey sis" text from Brad carried a request. Every "you know how hard things are for them" from Mom carried an order disguised as sympathy. When I bought my house at 30, everyone said they were proud, but the pride came with fine print. "Now you can help your brother more," Mom said, smiling like it was a compliment. I thought I could live with it. I thought being the strong one meant saying yes, over and over. But somewhere along the way, I stopped living for myself. So when they clapped at that pizza place, they weren't celebrating generosity. They were enforcing a tradition one I had built with my own silence. And as the ceiling fan hummed above me that sleepless night, I realized something simple and terrifying. Every favor I'd ever done for them was a brick in the cage I now lived in. By Monday morning, I was back at my desk at the marketing firm, pretending to focus on campaign briefs while the memory of that dinner looped like bad background music. My coworkers chatted about weekend brunches and yoga classes. I nodded in all the right places, smiling like my life wasn't cracking under the weight of family loyalty. When I opened my banking app during lunch, the balance hit me harder than any insult ever could. Transfers to Brad Coleman, $200, $350, $500, each one a quiet record of my guilt. Over time, they'd added up to thousands. A slow bleed I'd mistaken for love. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Helen, don't be angry at your brother. He means well." I stared at it until the words blurred. Brad always meant well. That phrase had covered every lie, every broken promise since we were kids. After work, I stopped by Maya Reed's apartment. She was my best friend, the kind who never sugarcoated truth. The smell of coffee and her dry wit were my safe place. "You're still paying for their bills, aren't you?" she asked before I even sat down. I tried to laugh it off, but Maya didn't blink. "They're family," I said, more out of habit than conviction. Maya leaned forward. "Family isn't supposed to drain you. Aaron, it's supposed to share the load." Her words landed, heavy and inconvenient. I left soon after, driving home through the quiet Tucson streets, the desert sky bleeding orange into purple. My house waited for me like a silent witness, walls paid for by my own exhaustion. I unlocked the door and stood in the entryway, the smell of old paint and lavender candles greeting me. This house was supposed to be freedom, proof that I'd built something without anyone's help. Yet somehow, my family had turned it into proof that I owed them. I walked through the living room, past the framed photo of Brad's kids on my shelf. They were smiling, Eli missing a front tooth, Nora clutching a stuffed rabbit. I loved them, and that love made everything harder. I sat on the couch, scrolling through messages bills I'd paid, apologies I'd sent, promises I'd made. Every thank you from Brad looked smaller now, emptier. My kindness had become currency, and I'd spent too much of it. Outside, a desert wind rattled the windows. For the first time, I wondered if the problem wasn't just them. Maybe it was me, the woman who kept saying yes because she was too afraid of what would happen if she finally said no. Saturday nights in Tucson always felt the same warm air. Neon lights, families crowding cheap restaurants, but that night at Vito's Pizza, the world tilted. I remember the way the air conditioner hummed above us, the scent of burnt cheese clinging to the red vinyl booths, and how my mother's pearls caught the light like little lies. We gathered around a long table, my parents Frank and Helen Cole, my brother Brad, his wife Lacey, their two kids Eli and Nora, and a swarm of relatives I barely knew but couldn't escape. Everyone laughed, talked over each other, passed salad bowls and gossip like currency. I told myself to breathe, to survive the night, to get through one more family dinner. Brad was in his element, animated, loud, charming in that practiced way that had always fooled people. He bragged about some new freelance project, another short-term gig that would disappear as soon as the check cleared. Lacey nodded at all the right moments, tapping on her phone between bites. The kids fidgeted beside her, tired and sticky from soda. I stayed quiet, picking at my pizza, hoping the night would end before it turned into something worse. But with my family, it always did. "Aaron," my father said suddenly, his tone casual but loaded. "Brad tells us you've been doing well. That house of yours looks beautiful." I smiled politely. "It's small, but it's home." Mom leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Brad and Lacey have been struggling to find a bigger place. The kids are growing so fast." My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. It was the same voice she used when she was about to volunteer me for something. Brad cleared his throat, standing up like he was giving a speech. "So, we were thinking," he began, drawing everyone's attention. "Erin's house would be perfect for us. Big yard, great neighborhood. It's just her living there. We could move in for a while, help each other out." The room went still, and then came the sound that would burn into my memory applause. They actually clapped. Lacey smiled, dabbing her lips with a napkin. It would really mean a lot. "Erin," I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. My own family, celebrating the idea of taking my home as if it were a birthday gift. Dad nodded. "It makes sense. Family helps family. You don't need all that space." The walls closed in. My pulse thudded in my ears. I glanced at my mom, hoping for rescue, but Helen just smiled faintly, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Something inside me snapped. I laughed. It came out sharp, too loud, the kind of laugh that made conversations die mid-sentence. "You're joking, right?" Brad grinned, oblivious. "Just temporary." "Until we save up. Temporary," I repeated. "Like the time I paid your electric bill, or your car repairs, or that vacation you said was for the kids but somehow included a spa package for Lacey." The table froze. The only sound was the clink of a fork hitting a plate. Dad shifted in his seat, his voice low. "Erin, let's not ruin dinner," Mom whispered. "Sweetheart, don't make a scene." But I was already standing. My hands shook, not from fear, but from years of silence cracking open. A scene. "You made it when you clapped, when you decided my life was community property." Brad's grin faltered. "We just thought, no." "You didn't think." I cut him off. "You assumed." The relatives sat frozen, caught between pity and shock. Even the kids stared, confused. For the first time, I didn't care. I looked at each face the family that had trained me to stay quiet and said, steady and clear, "If you think I'm giving up my house, you don't know me at all." No one spoke. My mother's pearls gleamed under the lights, her mouth opening but no words coming out. I pushed my chair back, the sound sharp as a gunshot, and walked out. Behind me, the applause had stopped. The next morning, sunlight poured through my blinds, too bright, too cruel. I sat at my kitchen counter, the taste of last night's anger still sharp in my mouth. My phone buzzed again and again, missed calls from Mom, a text from Brad, one from Lacey with a half-hearted "sorry if we upset you." None of them said the thing that mattered. None of them said we were wrong. I made coffee, but it tasted bitter no matter how much sugar I added. Maybe because I'd finally realized that sweetness never fixed anything. The house felt different now. My home, the one I'd bought after years of saving, suddenly carried the echo of every time they'd made me feel small. Every picture frame, every piece of furniture was something I'd earned alone. Yet somehow they believed it belonged to them. I opened my drawer and pulled out a thick folder bills, transfers, receipts, the paper trail of my quiet obedience. Electricity payments in Brad's name, car repair invoices, streaming subscriptions I hadn't realized were linked to my card, pages and pages of proof that I'd been funding their comfort for years. I spread them across the table, a battlefield of numbers and shame. My hands shook as I traced the totals. $9,432.76. That was the price of being the good sister. By noon. I called Maya Reed. She didn't bother with small talk. You okay? I almost laughed. Define okay. Maya's voice softened. You don't have to let them keep doing this. Aaron, you can stop any time. I did stop, I said quietly. They just don't know it yet. That night, I drove to my parents' house. The desert sky had turned dark purple, stars cutting through the heat haze. My heart pounded as I walked up the familiar path. Inside, the air smelled like detergent and old guilt. They were all there, Mom, Dad, Brad, Lacey, even the kids, dinner plates on the table, the TV humming in the background. Everyone looked up when I entered. Brad smiled weakly. Hey, sis. About last night I dropped the folder on the table. Paper spilled out like confetti made of truth. These, I said, are all the things I've paid for. Power bills, water, your car, even your Netflix. Lacey's face went pale. You didn't have to keep track. Yes, I cut in. I did. Because I wanted to remember how many times I let you use me. Mom stood, her tone sharp. Aaron, this isn't necessary. It's overdue. I said. My voice didn't shake this time. You clapped for him taking my house, but none of you clapped when I kept his lights on. You cheered for his dreams, while I worked overtime to make them possible. No one moved. Even Dad's usual avoidance failed him. His gaze dropped to the floor. Brad muttered something about misunderstanding, but the excuses died in his throat. I gathered the papers back into the folder, slower this time. From now on, I'm done paying for anyone's mistakes but my own, Mom whispered. You're being cruel. I looked at her, the woman who had taught me that love meant sacrifice, and felt something inside me settle. No, Mom. I'm finally being fair. And then I turned, walked out into the Tucson night, and for the first time in years, the air felt like mine. Days passed after that confrontation, quiet but charged. My phone barely rang now, just the occasional, "We need to talk" text from Mom, or a half-hearted emoji from Brad pretending things were normal. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The silence was the only thing that felt like peace. But peace never lasts in my family. On Friday evening, Maya Reed called. Aaron, she said, her voice tense. I think you need to see something. She texted me a link to Brad's social media. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. There he was, standing in front of a massive, sleek 4K television, grinning, holding a beer. Lacey was beside him, flashing a peace sign. The caption read, "Finally living the dream." The dream. My hands shook as I scrolled further. A new gaming console, a designer purse, a weekend trip to Sedona, post after post of their new chapter, uploaded just days after our fight. I stared at the screen, heat crawling up my neck. Every photo felt like a slap. The money I'd sent to keep the lights on had bought them luxury. My sacrifices had paid for selfies and hashtags. Maya's voice was soft through the phone. You know what this means. Right, I know, I said. They've been lying for years. That night, I sat at my dining table again, the same one covered in receipts, and opened my bank account. Line after line of transactions glared back at me. Payments for electricity, water, car repairs, streaming subscriptions, even phone plans I didn't know I was still covering. I did the math. Thousands of dollars gone. Years of guilt repackaged as generosity. I'd been funding a fantasy. Tears came, not from sadness, but from disgust. Disgust at them and at myself for letting it go on so long. I called the utility companies one by one, removed my name from the account. I said to each rep. Then I logged into every shared subscription and changed the passwords. It was midnight by the time I finished. My house was silent except for the hum of the fridge. I stood there, breathing hard, realizing the magnitude of what I'd just done. For the first time, there was no connection, no invisible thread tying my life to theirs. It felt terrifying. It felt right. I texted Maya 2 words. "It's done." Her reply came instantly. "Good. Now they'll have to live in their own reality." I put down the phone, looked at the empty kitchen, and whispered to myself, "So will I." It started the next morning, before I even finished my coffee. My phone lit up with notifications calls, texts, tags, and then the one thing that made my stomach twist, a Facebook post from my mother, Helen Cole. Some people forget what family means. Turning your back on your own blood is the worst kind of betrayal. No names. But everyone knew who she meant. By noon, the post had comments, dozens of them, family friends, old neighbors, distant cousins all chiming in with sympathy and judgment. Poor Brad. He's always been the responsible one. That's so sad. I thought Aaron was better than that. Then came Dad, Frank, who shared it with his own caption, "Raised a daughter who only cares about herself." The words hit harder than I expected. Short, public, final. I scrolled down and there was Brad, commenting beneath, "Guess a house means more than helping your family." And Lacey, always the performer, posted a picture of Eli and Nora sitting on the couch, faces sad and small, captioned, "When family lets you down." The likes poured in. The story spread. In a few hours, I wasn't Aaron Cole, marketing manager. I was the selfish daughter who abandoned her family. My chest tightened as I read the comments. People who didn't know the truth were defending them, attacking me. Every word felt like a bruise. I almost replied. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type out the whole history, the bills, the lies, the years of quiet giving. I wanted to scream that I wasn't the villain, but something stopped me. I thought of Maya's voice the night before. "You don't owe them your silence, but you also don't owe them your pain." I closed the laptop. The house fell silent except for the ticking clock. The phone rang again. Mom this time. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice cracked through the speaker. "How could you do this to your brother?" "To me. They're your family. Aaron, you have to fix this." Fix this. The same phrase she'd used my entire life. I sat there, listening until the message ended. Then I deleted it. For the rest of the day, I didn't check Facebook. I didn't answer calls. I turned off my phone, pulled the blinds, and sat in the quiet, letting the world think what it wanted. By sunset, I finally exhaled. They could own the story online if they wanted, but they'd never own me again. And as the sky turned orange over Tucson, I realized something I should have known years ago. Silence isn't surrender. It's freedom. 2 months passed before I heard the next update, and it didn't come from my family, it came from Maya Reed during a lunch break. Her tone was calm, but her eyes gave it away. "Aaron," she said, "you might want to sit down." Brad and Lacey Coleman had been evicted from their apartment. I blinked, unsure what to feel. Pity. Maybe. Relief. Definitely. Maya explained how the landlord had warned them for weeks, but without my payments for their utilities and car, they couldn't keep up. Now they were staying in a cheap roadside motel on the outskirts of Tucson, the kind with flickering neon signs and curtains that never close all the way. The image hit me harder than I expected. Eli and Nora sleeping on a pull-out couch, their toys stuffed into plastic bins, the parents scrolling their phones, blaming everyone but themselves. For a second, I almost reached for my phone to call Mom. Old reflex, but I stopped. I'd been trained to fix every mess they made. This time, I let the silence do it. Later that week, Mom finally called. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. "Your brother's in a bad place," she said. "The kids, they don't understand what's happening. Maybe you could help." Just this once I swallowed hard. "I have helped," I said softly, "for years." She didn't argue, just sighed, a sound that felt like surrender, and hung up. I stood by the window, watching the Arizona heat shimmer on the pavement. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt still, like I'd stepped out of a storm and could finally see the sky. I thought about Brad and Lacey, about their choices, their denial, but mostly, I thought about myself, how much life I'd given away trying to earn a love that should have been free. The motel, the eviction, the silence, it wasn't revenge. It was consequence. And as the sun set over Tucson, my house glowed in the last light of day, quiet, safe, and finally, mine. It took me another month to do the one thing I'd avoided my whole life, cut the cord completely. I opened my contacts list, scrolled through the names that had defined me for 32 years. Mom, Dad, Brad, Lacey, and pressed block, one by one. My finger hovered over each before I tapped, like a final goodbye. No tears, no guilt, just a strange, quiet lightness. The next morning, my house felt different. The air smelled cleaner, the silence softer. For the first time, my phone didn't buzz with requests, guilt trips, or pity disguised as concern. It was just mine, my space, my peace. I signed up for a photography course at the local community center, something I'd dreamed of for years but always postponed because someone else needed the money. On the first night, I stood in a room full of strangers holding cameras, not responsibilities. The instructor asked us to photograph something that made us feel free. I thought of my old life of bills that weren't mine, dinners that turned into ambushes, and the endless noise of being the family savior. Then I looked at the desert sky through the window. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in amber and gold. I lifted the camera and took the shot. The shutter clicked a simple sound, but to me, it was everything. That night, as I pinned the photo to my wall, I realized no wasn't a rejection. It was a declaration, a boundary drawn in gold light. They might never understand why I walked away, but I didn't need them to. For the first time, I wasn't the good one or the selfish one. I was simply me. A few weeks later, I drove out to the edge of the desert just before dusk, my camera in the passenger seat and the windows down. The air smelled like dust and new beginnings. The sky stretched wide and endless, streaked with gold, the kind of light that makes you feel small and infinite all at once. I parked near an empty overlook, the same kind of place my family used to visit on Sundays when things still felt whole. I stood there, camera in hand, and pointed the lens toward a single cactus standing alone against the fading light. Strong, unbending, rooted. I pressed the shutter. The photo would be the first piece in my new series, Boundaries. As the last light slipped away, I thought of Brad and Lacey, of my parents, of all the years I'd spent believing that love had to hurt to be real. It didn't. It never did. I smiled, whispering to the desert wind, "No isn't cruelty. It's clarity." When I got back in my car, I felt lighter. The past was behind me, the road open ahead, and for the first time in my life, freedom didn't feel lonely. It felt like home.